That's, okay, you guys want to go ahead and present?
Sure, yeah.
Just go ahead and introduce yourselves to the committee.
Okay, so my name is Dan Cornett, resident of North Huntington for about 15 years now. I'm a co-founder of the Friends of Northland Trails group, a group that we started this past summer along with Bob Morgan there, who is my co-founder. I don't know if I can do something to get back up on that.
Yeah, I'm trying. I got bumped and then trying to get you or get myself out of it.
Can he step up to a mic? Can you go up a microphone at the desk there? You got to speak right into it, and we can all hear you a little better. Okay, that works too.
Okay. All right, sorry. Not the ideal setup for me as far as presentations go, but we'll make do.
I'm just gonna shut it down.
Just waiting for my slides to come up here.
You want to unplug your HDMI and plug it back in?
Sure. There we go. Okay. We good? Everyone can hear me? Okay. All right. So as I said, we started this group this past summer. We started working in June and founded the group more formally in October. We had our first formal meeting in November, and we only had our second formal meeting in January. And since then, we've started marketing our group more publicly. Okay, so we're a young group, but we've started to really gain momentum in a short amount of time. So right now, you know, we've been doing a lot of work during this time period to build some trail concepts, knowledge, relationships, support, just figure out how to move forward and get a trail network built. We're also currently building a board of directors. We have some candidates in mind, but any of you, we're looking for people with experience of public service. So if you're interested, I'd be happy to talk more about that as well. Okay. Just some of the partnerships and relationships that we've been building. We've been working with Trail Pittsburgh, who's a local bicycling advocacy group. They do fundraising and organize volunteers to build trails and maintain trails in about 14 regional parks. So all around Western Pennsylvania, except markedly not in Westmoreland County yet. They have not been able to kind of get anything going. So we're part of their effort to get moving there. We've been working with the Irwin Project, who was responsible for the streetscape down in Irwin, among other things. Some different community leaders, experts who have been serving as advisors. Westmoreland County Parks and Recreation. So we've worked with Brandon Simpson, who's the director down there. He's given us a lot of good advice and guidance and helped us, you know, kind of get this group off the ground. And then we've talked with Harry, Ryan, Dan Miller, North Huntington Township some. Just had a meeting with Dan 2 weeks ago on this topic, okay? So, like I said, we're young. We have a Facebook group, about 100 people, a mailing list of about 28 people, a couple of you who have joined. And our last meeting had 13 people, right? Which was pretty good. So you see, it's hard to get people to come out to a public meeting. So we were really pleased with that. Just our second meeting, we had 13 people there, okay? So our mission is just to make it a little more concrete. What we're trying to do is make it easier and more fun to bike, walk, and run around our community by creating a trail network, okay? Easier and more fun. You know, we want recreation to be more of a part of an everyday life and not like a special event, right? So right now, if I want to go bike riding on a trail, right, it's a 10 to 20 minute drive. After I load up my car, load up the kids, 15, 20 minute ordeal, right? Kind of want to just walk out my door and make it happen a little easier than we can today. More specifically, I'd love my children to be able to do the same, right? So one of the core parts of our mission is increasing access, right? So easier and more fun, increasing access makes it easier, okay? So kind of like the step back just a little bit. The Pennsylvania DCNR put together a map that categorizes areas according to who has access to recreation within a 10-minute walk of their home, okay? This was core to their mission to figure out who has access in Pennsylvania to recreation. And, you know, why a 10-minute walk? Because if you can walk to recreation, you're going to use it more frequently. Use it more frequently, you get all the benefits of that recreation, okay? Also, children don't have cars, right? So they need to walk or else convince our parents, hey, can you give me a ride wherever, over to Oak Hollow or whatever it may be, right? So I want to share that map just quickly. On the handouts that we gave you, there's QR codes, and one of those QR codes will take you to this map if you want to explore it yourself, okay? Before I zoom in on this, you can see that, you know, this is a color-coded map. It's probably a little small up there on the screen. I apologize for that, but basically the township is right there in the middle. And if you can see the dark blue areas there, that is open land in our township. The light blue areas around those dark blue areas are areas that have access, meaning portions of the community where the open land is within 10 minutes, a 10-minute walk of that open access land, okay? Then you see other colors, right? Red, orange, yellow. Those are areas outside of that access area where you have a 10-minute walk. And the colors are based on population density. So the darker the color, red is a high density population, orange less so, and low being low density. So you can see most of the area south of Route 30 in our township is categorized as high need according to the DCNR, state of Pennsylvania, okay? And on the side here, I don't know if you can see, it's a little small, but there's some statistics. They state that 28% of our population in North Huntington Township are served within a 10-minute walk of open space. That means 72% are not served, right? And that's a number that we're trying to increase, okay? Make sense so far? Now, the reason this is important is the state has a statewide recreation plan. There's 5 pillars, I won't go into all of them, but one important part is recreation for all. Recreation for all is based off of the statistics in that map, okay? So when we look at those statistics in the map, us being a high-need area, high-need areas are more likely to receive grants. They're a focus of the state as far as increasing recreation, okay? So this is information we got from Brandon Simpson about how to kind of look into this and dig in. So that's good. Even though we don't like to see the red, we like to see more likely to receive grants because that helps.
Can you talk more to the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay, so our vision is to build trails that connect the neighborhoods, businesses, schools, and parks of the Norwood community. There have been some people who have suggested this before and tried it. Obviously, hasn't quite worked. So, you know, we're going to try again and try to get this going. We're going to also connect them to the Westmoreland Heritage Trail and the Great Allegheny Passage, right? Because, you know, those are 2 critical regional trail links and a great trail network itself. And then we'll introduce other recreation along the trail network so life's even more fun, right? So there's that fun word again, access and fun. These are core to what we're trying to do. We want to make destinations as well. Okay, just to pop over to another map quickly. Let me zoom in just a little bit for you. Okay. All right, so I pulled in the data from the DCNR. I have a little bit of a GIS background, a little bit of an engineering background. So I pulled that data into this map so we could kind of look at it a little closer, okay? Let me hide a couple of these things here first. So you can see we got some yellow lines drawn right there in the middle of the township. These are areas that we think that we should attack first as far as low-hanging fruit and kind of utility to the community. So these are areas that we're actively exploring. So this vertical yellow line here, this is the old York Railroad, okay? Back in the early 1900s, York Railroad ran through the township. And a lot of the land now is privately owned and things like that, but there's still portions of it that we think that we could get built into a trail network. So not everything along this route do we think will work necessarily. It may not work. I'm sure we're going to have to do some detours. But in concept, we think it's important to put something down this corridor here because it gets into Hawntown and then starts extending further, which I'll get into in a bit. Another critical piece of that is it's right next to Tinkers Run Park and right next to the high school. Looks like some of that's not refreshing. Oh, I don't have network access. So it's not gonna, I'm gonna have to stay zoomed out. Okay, so this link here, this is the old trolley line that ran out to Trafford. Okay, and I think you guys were discussing it at your last meeting. So this trolley line, and I apologize that I can't zoom in further, but this area right next to it is Hilltop Park. Now, I was in there recently with Trail Pittsburgh, walking the grounds a little bit. We determined that we could put 2 miles worth of mountain biking trails in that park, okay? So it's feasible, it's a good park, it's probably underutilized today. We can get more value out of it. Furthermore, this trail here, it's pretty open space, it's pretty low-hanging fruit as far as building something a little more publicly accessible, even though it's not as populated of an area. Third route, a little harder to see. We think there's a concept where we could run a trail through the Public Works facility, which would then run down the valley into Larmer and link up with the Norwin Trail, okay? So these are 3 spots where we think are high probability, have a good start to a trail network. We think they're visible, we think they're low-hanging fruit, we think they serve our community well, okay? And I apologize, since I do not have network. Can I get on the Wi-Fi?
I don't know the guest password, I just know the regular password, and
All right, let me do a hotspot real quick. I appreciate your patience. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so I just turned on a layer which shows a couple purple lines kind of snaking out of the township away from the 3 yellow lines that I had as our initial trail network. So one of them heads south, and this route that you see here cuts down through the south of the township all the way through Swickley Township down to the Yauk, which of course on the other side of the Yauk is the Great Allegheny Passage. That's the extent of the old Youghiogheny Railroad. So especially when you get out in Swickley Township, a lot more of those rail beds are more open. And so it's a bit more feasible. So even though it's not our township, it's important to see how we could link into this particular trail and help create that link down to the Great Allegheny Passage. So that's why the Yauk Railroad is kind of appealing to us. Also from this trolley line, now I just kind of traced Brush Creek. I'm not too familiar with all the old routes that the actual trolley line took. There was like 5 bridges involved, a big bridge in Larmer over Route 993, things like that. But Brush Creek itself is pretty low-lying, a lot of open space. But if we can go up this valley, even though there's less population out there, you know, still it's an important link up into the Westmoreland Heritage Trail. So then if you kind of zoom out a little bit, this is the Westmoreland Heritage Trail at the north, Great Allegheny Passage running down to the west and the south. You could almost see our township as being a bypass to Pittsburgh, right? At that point, since Westmoreland Heritage Trail is looking to hook into Pittsburgh, we would be taking all the traffic through here, people who would want to run south all the way down to West Newton and Ohio Powell and whatnot, rather than them having to go into Pittsburgh, right? So we could be a critical link in the regional trail network. And I believe if we get these initial trails going first, that's much more likely that that's going to happen. Okay, backing up a little further, and then our vision, this is a much looser portion of it. At that point, once we have a good trail network going, you know, we hope to then almost have spokes going off these trails. Again, our goals being to increase access to make things fun. If we could, you know, get some spokes getting down into our business district along Route 30 out to Westmoreland City, could we link Lions Park down to Braddock's Trail, those sorts of things. We think some of these routes are viable. Terrain's always going to be a challenge in our community, right? I don't think we should let that stop us. I think that will just make us stronger, right? Get a little more exercise. But it'll be fun, right? It'll be cool to be able to get around town on our bikes and have things for our kids to do, okay? Okay, so I won't, you know, kind of go into all of this. This is on the back of the handouts that we gave you. But basically, we've formed objectives of what our group intends to do both in pre-trail construction and post-trail construction. You know, the key things are advocacy, funding, right? We look at post-trail construction. We're working with Trail Pittsburgh, who knows how to raise volunteers, raise funds, get the maintenance done, okay? We'll be around to serve for that maintenance. So there's always a lot of, you know, fears around, you know, our taxes going to have to be involved and things like that. And maybe a little bit, but we'll be able to get a lot of outside funding, a lot of grants, a lot of volunteers. Again, we have 100 people on the Facebook group, or around 30 on the mailing list, half of which are willing to be volunteers to maintain trails and help build them, right? So these are our objectives. You know, they're on your handout, so you can look at them more later. So yeah, I mean, we have a pretty cool opportunity in front of us. I think a lot of really good things are lining up to make this happen right now. There's a lot of people interested. I think we can get it done. I think it's out there, the grant money's out there, and I think while this plan is active with the state from 2020 to 2024, we're a high need area, and it's a good opportunity to get some of that grant money to help, okay? That's it, thank you.
That, I guess, as a segue, now you can hear me. That as a segue, this is Greg. You guys haven't met Greg before. He's been working with Carolyn and I. I'm AJ, if you remember from 2 meetings ago. Carolyn, this is, I think, her last night of open houses for a zoning amendment, hence why she's not here. It's just literally, it's the same exact time. What we're going to try to do is run you through materials. I think Harry had circulated or handed out hard copies and everything, and kind of take you through the beginning parts of putting document together. And then we're going to have some discussion in terms of schedule, in terms of next steps, and starting to put ourselves kind of on a path of, you're going to start getting more material, meaning lots of text to read and those types of things. So kind of go through that before we break. You know, I think we're shooting for maybe 6:30 or something like that. Sound like a plan in terms of game plan? Okay. Do you want to go ahead and start?
Yep, so if you don't mind, I'll just ask you to advance the slides, but we can go on to the next slide. So before we jump into tonight's discussion, I just wanted to do a quick recap of our last meeting. Really just talk about some of the key takeaways and how we can start to fold in some of that information that we talked about, what we've been working on in the office since then, and really start to advance the comp plan forward. So during the last meeting's discussion, if you could advance to the next slide. I know this map was shown that basically showed, you know, areas throughout the township that are undeveloped at this point. One of the things that we really wanted to illustrate by showing the map and kind of walking through some of that data during the last meeting was to really start to talk about how comp plans can help inform townships, neighborhoods, communities that are basically looking to update their zoning and land use with aligning those with the community's vision and long-term goals that they have. We know that you guys are in a fortunate position to see a lot of successful development take place, and we just want to make sure that in recognizing sort of the conditions of the community, how we can help work with you and the community to guide the future developments into something that I think everyone's happy with and agrees with.
I'm just gonna bring this down for you.
So just a point of reference, gray is largely the developed areas in the township, whether it's single-family lots, whether it is, commercial development, et cetera. Green are those areas that have less development. A good bit of what you just heard in terms of particularly TPL's analysis of accessibility areas, that's who did the DCNR database. Their analysis in terms of, I think it was your blue areas, were those undeveloped areas. Those are on here, but there's also some other development areas that land can be further subdivided. That is included in this analysis. And so if you remember, the whole concept of build out was to fast forward out. This is not a realistic thing, but it gives you a yardstick or some way of measuring kind of growth. If you took all that development and you land that could be developed and you apply zoning as you all know it today, how much more stuff would you have? How many more homes would you have? How much commercial development you would have? So one of the things that everybody is working towards is what is the future of the community? What is that vision in terms of the future? Part of the trail discussion is just another layer to go into that kind of thought process. So the fact that the friends are doing their thing while you're doing your comprehensive planning makes a lot of sense, and there's a good dovetail. So in some of these places where there should be some connectivity, the comp plan is where you want to kind of bake those ideas or those goals, those initiatives into a public policy. That helps those guys when they're pursuing grant dollars, whether they're working in partnership directly with the township or they're working with somebody like Trail Pittsburgh, et cetera, pursuing dollars, because it is now kind of a policy. So I think, while these two conversations weren't planned to be on the same evening or whatever, there's a lot of synergy between the conversations themselves.
And so again, this was just looking at some of the information from the last meeting, basically breaking down some of those areas in green and really starting to look at, the percentages of the areas that are developed and less developed for that matter. So just some of the key takeaways from that last meeting. So you can see that most of the land throughout the township breaks out to be about 90% residential. 40% of the land remains undevelopable, and I think that that's a key thing to recognize there, is that even though there is a significant amount of area that's built up, and as I mentioned, you have thriving businesses, a strong residential community, there is that 40% that the comprehensive plan can look towards the future and say, what do we imagine these places, how can we guide the future for these areas specifically? And so basically we'll just jump into it and talk about the comprehensive plan. And so many of you may be familiar with it, or I think the concept is fairly easy to grasp. But essentially, I think what the important thing to take away, especially for a steering committee and the place that we are today, is to really think about what is the feedback that we've heard about the community, what do we know about our community, and what can we really embed in this long-term plan to inform us in terms of any future development proposals, any future land use changes or zoning changes. How can we bake that into this plan so that when something does come up, there's a solution for it and it's not so reactionary? And so I think some of the key takeaways from a comp plan is, one, it's just accessible. You're able to look at the plan and say, okay, this is sort of what we deem is important for the community. There's a sense of accountability with it too, right? So if a developer comes in and says, we are proposing this certain development or this use on the property, and you could kind of reflect back on the comp plan and say, that aligns with what we imagine for this place, or, you know, like, it gives you some checks and balances to look back at your proposal. I think the efficiency purposes, it kind of speaks to itself, where if you've organized your thoughts and you've planned out the future, you can kind of look back and see, how does this proposal align with that? Equity, I think that is something that is important across all best practices in planning. How can you think about accessible open space, housing opportunities, things that the community really needs and desires, and how can you make that more accessible to folks? And then predictability and transparency, again, I think those are just terms that the comp plan is just, it's a living document that is accessible to everyone to look at and to see, these are the priorities that we have for our community, and how can we achieve those?
Greg, I have a question if I could. When you say equity, does that also go into providing or having different zoning districts to be able to accommodate multiple uses?
I think that it could certainly be that case. I don't think that, I think the important thing about the comp plan is, one, it wants to be flexible, right? You really don't want to hem yourself into a prescribed vision and then say, oh, we didn't really want that there, so how do we move it somewhere else? But I think it's a little bit of being flexible, but understanding that, yes, it needs to be equitable, and that how does this best serve the community? How does it best serve the needs of the business district? And so if it needs to complement or be flexible to complement, you know, a variety of uses, I think that's appropriate.
Okay. Thank you.
I think the only thing I would add to that, in the meeting that I was with you guys, we had a discussion in terms of affordability in the community, right? And the idea of having some places that maybe there's a little bit higher density, so that you know, whether you're an empty nester family and you don't want to have the large lot, or you're a recent college graduate, you don't have a lot of savings or any savings, how can you stay in the community, live in the community? You may have grown up here, and you may kind of be pushed out. That's a side of equity as well. And so I think that notion of, is there a formula? No, there's not a formula. There's not a set standard to say, okay, pull it out of the municipality's planning code. Here's what you guys did in terms of equity. I think as a part of the comprehensive plan, you as a community should be defining what you think are areas that are of concern, where that equity or fairness is something that's fragile, and you want to make sure no opportunities are lost. You know, whether, again, it's on the housing affordability, whether it's on the land use mix, that the community doesn't become so heavy, I'm making stuff up, but so heavy on commercial development and not so much on the residential, which is not the case in your township. But I think that's like an empty slate for you guys to define. It's just that in today's world, the comp plans have gone much more complex, right? And while historically, you know, sewer and water and roads and land use, that's what they typically focused on. But the dimensions of land use are a lot more complicated in today's world. And so you just have the opportunity to start defining some goals and aspirations of what you think is an equitable place. I clearly heard from you that, hey, we want to make sure that if a resident wants to live here, there's a way, if somebody wants to live here, there's a way for them to become a resident. That's what I took away, one of the key points from that last discussion. You know, that and the traffic is probably your biggest throttle, you know, in terms of growth and development. You know, when you have to contend with the Route 30 artery and when it gets backed up, that really could put some serious limits in some areas that could develop. And then the third key thing that I heard was that whole notion of Greg's map that he showed earlier, where we have developable areas in the hinterland. Is that really the first priority? Should we be looking at places where there's already infrastructure, where there's already been grading, things have been leveled off, do we reinvest in those first before we start expanding the footprint of development? That was the other big takeaway. Did I say anything incorrect there from what you guys remember? Yeah.
And as we go through the presentation too, please feel free to interject and ask questions, and, you know, if you have thoughts. I don't want you to feel like we're just going to talk at you. So. And so as we've been going through this process, we have been conducting an online survey that has a series of 9 questions that ask basically, why do you like to live, work, or what do you love about your neighborhood, basically. And of those 9 questions, we've determined that there's been 5 key themes that have come out of that. There's a need for housing growth, parks and recreation, traffic and street safety, again, as AJ just mentioned, with the traffic congestion, building a sense of community, and then also the commercial uses. So of the 950 comments that we've received thus far, these are sort of the themes that have arisen from those questionnaires. And in the back of the packets, we basically put all of the tables as a sort of, just so you could see how they shook out through there. But the reason we wanted to call out this, the community feedback so far in the comprehensive plan, is because, again, this is sort of what starts to feed the comprehensive plan. The input that we receive from you guys, other stakeholders, and the community at large, this is what we really start to identify as the priorities for the community. So if we were to start tomorrow and start writing the comp plan, we would be looking at these 5 themes and how could we improve upon those to really start to strengthen the township.
And Greg, just to give like an example of the housing growth, what are the kinds of things that the public was kind of commenting on?
So for housing growth, some of the comments were really geared towards the production of more housing, affordable housing for that matter. Some of the other things, the parks and recreation, folks are really looking at an increase in more recreational opportunities. And I think to that end, some creative usage of maybe vacant or underutilized space to create little pocket parks or things like that in the community where you could have temporary get-togethers and gatherings. Those opportunities could start to unlock. This other point that was brought up about a sense of community. There was a theme that came up in a lot of the questionnaires, basically about having a greater sense of community, bringing people together through events, festivals, things like that. And so you can start to see how some of these themes really start to tie in together. And one of the last ones that was a common theme was just the quality of life. Folks were really stressed or taxed, for that matter, in terms of just the traffic and circulation and being able to get around the neighborhoods. And I think that when you start to look at housing growth, when you start to look at the commercial activity, and you start to see how all of these things start to compound on each other, finding other ways to guide the comprehensive plan to address these issues becomes ever more pressing. So we put together a couple rules of thumb that we wanted to basically use as sort of guideposts when we put together the comp plan. Again, these themes are just things that we, looking at the results from the community survey, looking at best practices from other comp plans, and some of the other research that we've been looking at around planning and land use. These were just some general rules of thumb that we wanted to explore with you guys. Again, these are pretty high level, but as we go through the actual writing of the comp plan, they'll get pretty detailed. But the first rule of thumb is just basically aiming close to the ground. And what we mean by that is just looking at smaller projects, looking at not tackling a huge project that involves a lot of resources in terms of planning and money and things like that, but how can we tackle smaller projects that have a high impact on the community, that could again be an example of, is there vacant property or underutilized property in a high trafficked, high visibility area, and how could that really start to benefit the community? Maybe that does become the place where there's festivals held, and that again reinforces that need for, that some folks expressed about having the community come together. But really, you can start to build momentum off of just smaller projects. I think that helps with decision-making, that helps with, okay, we've understood how to execute this project, how can we move on to the next one? And then once you get that momentum going, you can really start to build and tackle larger projects.
Crawl, walk, run, right? Start with the baby step, get confidence, and then before you know it, you'll be on.
And again, this would be baked into the comp plan. An example of that would be mapping out areas in the community. Where are the high traffic commercial corridors? What are the property, what is the status of the properties there? Are there vacancies? Things of that matter. But you do that in-depth analysis and you start to say, well, what are the opportunities here? Aligning guidance from you all, guidance from the community, and then, starting to really build that vision. And again, sorry if some of these themes become repetitive. It's just, hopefully in the end, you can start to see how they all become, they're all little pieces of the puzzle that make the complete picture. This rule of thumb talking about filling the gaps, this is again, it could mean a number of things. One is literally if there's gaps in the fabric of a commercial corridor, there's a vacant property that's been sitting empty for a number of years. What is the future use of that? How can it better serve the commercial corridor itself? How can it better serve the residents? It could also mean, filling the gaps could also mean where are things that we're falling short on. We see that there's a gap in or a need for more recreational space. Where's opportunities where we can actually fill that need with, okay, here's a new piece of property that we can actually put on some publicly accessible open space. But essentially what this does is helps us, through the comp plan, we can look to the long-term vision of that area. So understanding the needs today, planning for the future, I think that's one of the key takeaways from here. What is also something that is important about the comp plan is managing expectations. So on this fourth point here, talking about if there's an interim use, basically just to get that underutilized or that space that's been sitting sort of dormant for a while, how can you activate that in the interim, knowing that in the future that may become a high visible piece of property that someone wants to develop for some commercial use or some mixed use project. But in the interim, you're using it to benefit the community, but you could also refer back to the comp plan and say, okay, this is an interim use. We're managing expectations here, knowing that in the future this could actually become a viable project. And I bring that up just because in my experience, I've seen where there's been a piece of vacant property, the community put on they had a garden, it became an event space, and then a developer came down a few years later and actually put up a new building, and the community was upset because they lost their gathering space. But I think being able to manage some of those expectations and say, there is a long-term vision for this, but let's work together in the interim.
Number 3, so that reoccurring theme of building community. You have a lot of programming. Why are people saying that? What's your sense of, it's a fast-paced place, everybody does their thing. You go to volleyball, right? Mm-hmm. Volleyball, you're doing something else, and not everybody's always coming together, or there are other things going on. Like, give us a little bit insight of maybe why people are saying that. Because it is a reoccurring theme.
My guess would be lack of information to the public on the various.
They're not aware of the opportunities that exist.
Exactly.
How about other thoughts?
No, just to hit on your mark, we are looking at ways to get that information out. As I said, I don't feel as though we're connected our slogan. The Norwin Inn magazine, I believe that's what it is. We're going to start utilizing that to get information out. The sponsorship program, I just put together the letters for businesses today to make more people aware of what's going on to get that connection. Also, I submitted a grant through the local government academy for an intern for recreation, to take the ideas and the comments from here and kind of put a strategic plan together to move forward as far as recreation programming and how help get the word out.
Yeah, I think without the lack of and nobody reading a local paper, you have to look for places to get the information. I know there was a folder that's given at the beginning of the year that will talk about the various events the township has throughout the year. And you sort of put that in a safe place, but to reference back to that in our busy lives without seeing, we have the Halloween event or we have an event going on here.
Yep. Yeah, I found those old, I think the oldest one I found was 2004. I don't know when it stopped being published. That's a discussion for another time with the Parks Director, but I did find those. We used to put those out, 20 years ago. But I don't know what happened between 20 years ago and now.
Is my mic on? I think it is. I think one of the other things too is there's not like a central place where people sort of are always going, like we don't have like a place where people happen by and there's signs up or bulletin boards. Like we don't have, it's kind of a sprawling place and people don't frequent the same businesses or I know I've seen this a lot of places. There's no community center where people are sort of popping in for different things all the time. So I think that because the foot traffic is spread out and people aren't kind of funneled through a central space all the time, that it's harder for people to sort of just see this stuff by accident.
Yeah.
What do you think is the close approximation to that hub, that center of the community? Because you're hitting on, both of you guys I think are spot on, and they just compound the problem, the two of them together but when do people think of it as the center of North Huntington?
Well, there is no center. I think this building would be the center.
Which is, to your point, is not on the beaten path in terms of being able to see things like news and notes of what's going on in the township.
Obviously, is that on? Yeah. Obviously, everyone drives up and down Route 30, but any type of signage on Route 30, no one's going to pay attention to unless you're sitting at a red light on Route 30.
With on the other side.
Yeah. So I don't know. I find myself sitting at the red light down by Walmart all the time, right at the end of Mills Drive, where it intersects with Barnes Lake, and you stare at grass on the hillside. I'm probably at that light 3-4 times a week. I don't know how everyone else is as North Huntington residents, but if I think of an area where people stare for more than a few seconds, aside from red lights on Route 30, but you have people that live in the township that never go this end, ever,
Right.
or vice versa, that never go this end. So, where are people going? Downtown Irwin, Walmart, Target. That would be my opinion where residents frequent, but you probably do have residents on this end of the township that might go to North for Sales Walmart, North for Sales Home Depot, so it's almost like you would need, I'm not sure, because I live on that end of the township, so I honestly don't know where that is on that end of the township, other than on Route 30, maybe Norman Town Square.
So like the geography of the community, the place almost makes a center difficult. There's potentially multiple centers. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah.
Also the school district would be something that centralizes us and communicating through their means, whether it's pamphlets that are distributed monthly from the township to every school student that gets taken home and left in the book bag and nobody reads it, but because usually when you see the pamphlets or community events, you'll see it in the local restaurant or
Yep.
you walk in, there may be a gas station that people go to and you'd see something hung up somewhere.
Not to
put you on the spot, but weren't we talking about beefing up the Nixle alerts with community events potentially, and not just emergency or?
Yeah, we just discussed that, I think about 2 weeks ago. I'm okay utilizing the Nixle system to put things out, because that's about a $4,000 a year service. For us to do it through our website, it would cost 3 or 4 times that. I looked into it, and it's just not feasible, but there's already about 75 to 8,000 people registered with Nixle. We have our weekly email blast, which is, I think, up to 1,100 subscribers, but, I mean, it's a slow start. Facebook, I'll use Waffles and Caffeinated. We put a post up that they opened. We had 49,000 interactions with that post. 49,000. We put a post up about a public meeting coming up, it's like crickets. You know? So it's, people are more in tune to new businesses or niche businesses. Recreation, we did have a lot of pop-up or a lot of hits last year. It's just getting the word out. I do recognize that we do need to do a better job.
What about posters in the new businesses? If 49,000 people are excited about waffles and caffeinated, we put a couple signs in there for some things.
Yeah, exactly. I think we need to do, like those little brochures. I mean, I was at the library on Saturday, and a big poster board of everything. We still have our survey down there. I don't know how much more that's gathered, but at the library, we could put signboards up at our parks for events coming up. We just have to make sure they get changed out and not be outdated. The schools, as you stated, a weekly flyer or theirs.
Harry, you're the one that deals with the social media for the township, correct?
Myself and Jonathan.
Would it be out of the question to have someone dedicated to dealing with the social media aspect to getting all that out? That's their job. They know how to get views.
Jonathan is our communications / IT guy. I mean,
Okay.
it's very time consuming on
Right.
both. That position is really a 2-person job, one specifically for IT and one specifically for community relations. As far as budgeting, we just don't have the funds to do that yet. So that's why I help out John, and then Jonathan has an officer in the police department help out with IT. So it's really 3 of us.
But having like someone dedicated to communications for events, businesses, happenings of the township, and that is a full-time job. What would the return on investment be to have a person that's all they do? Like, there's probably different ways to reach out to people that we're not thinking, but that's what they learn how to do. That's what they know. This is what we want. Community involvement, people to know what's going on, having one person dealing with that specifically.
Right.
There are subcontractors out there that do $300-400 a month. I've used them in the past for my company, social media marketing experts.
But I have another idea too, like, first of all, do we have an Instagram account?
We do. We have Instagram and Twitter.
Because the other thing you could do is have, like, I've seen these things where different groups take over the accounts for the day or whatever. Like, if somebody's having an event, they could take over the Facebook and Instagram for that week and just, like, blast a whole bunch of stuff about that event. And then the next group that's having an event could take over. That sort of takes the burden off of you guys, and also puts the people who know the most about the event, or most enthusiastic about it, in charge of.
Well, we kind of do that now. I attend every event I can. When we have the recreation events, Jonathan attends those, and he'll do postings during the event. I think we're doing an okay job for now, but Jonathan is overwhelmed with IT and communication. But we just don't have room in the budget to split that out.
I think what you guys just went through, this little discussion, this is exactly what the comp plan is for, right? What I think you're identifying, the residents have said, and I think your suspicions are probably spot on, of you gotta figure out better ways of getting information into people's hands, into making it convenient for their lives, right? And that's a challenge, and you got a budget and it's all other stuff. At the end of the day, you have to, as a part of being on the steering committee, help us prioritize how important that particular topic is. Because when you're fighting for that dollar of, these guys want to build trails, somebody wants to replace a playground somewhere, you got some road improvements that are needed, those are all things tugging for that same dollar. Where does the whole communication thing go, right? Am I spot on in terms of that? That's the purpose of comp plan.
Yeah, and just one more observation too, and I think what was coming out of the conversation too, just about having a more social media presence or having a presence where it's more accessible to the broader community also helps to reinforce that sense of community, where you feel like there's someone who's saying, hey, come out to this event. You go out to that event. How did you hear about this? On Instagram, on Twitter. But again, there's communication that's being disseminated across. And I know that not everyone's tech savvy. I'd be the first to admit I don't even have a Twitter. I don't even know how it works. But I know that how it does work in terms of getting information out. And I think that's something too that maybe some of the people that are looking at where can I find events, maybe it's not on a poster or, you know, the billboards, but on social media I could look on my phone and say, oh, there's something this weekend. So again, I think that again reinforces some of the comments that we heard from the community through the survey about bringing people together and such. So, and I think that conversation that just came up, one of the themes ties in nicely with this, which is working at scale. So again, a lot of the initiatives that the comp plan looks to address can either be both small or large. Again, we want to try to predict or not predict, but really prepare for any future land use changes, land use goals and zoning initiatives. And so one of the things that by looking at the long-term vision, this does require a lot of work. You know, you mentioned three positions really trying to tackle IT, getting some of the communications out. That alone is 2 positions there. But if you're looking to really tackle some of this long-term planning and zoning, that does also require someone who is looking at this work, evaluating what is the current conditions of these places. You know, what is not only the physical makeup, but what is the zoning and land use, and what can we do with this, you know, this piece of property today and in the future. And so that's really what we're talking about here is working at scale. We know that there's a lot of potential throughout the township, and having someone and having a committee, having an individual, someone who is dedicated to looking at the long-range planning of the township becomes ever more important. Just because it is such an in-depth process for looking at zoning applications or land use applications, coordinating with local community groups or stakeholders and such. It's just a lot of work that when it's disseminated across individuals, sometimes it may fall through the cracks or not be done as efficiently. And so we think that addressing the problem at scale, or not even the problem, but addressing the work at scale starts to really help. And so the comp plan can really start to help organize that information and also looking at, okay, here's a proposal. What does the comp plan say? Do we think it makes sense? Maybe the comp plan is a little outdated on this particular area, but that way you're able to evaluate things a little bit more efficiently. This one is both, I think, a physical and social rule of thumb here, enhancing connectivity. So again, as I mentioned in my earlier preamble, a lot of these start to sound redundant, but I think that there's a lot of overlap just because of how they all start to reinforce each other. But enhancing the connectivity can be both through communication, you know, building that sense of community, but it can also be through some of the physical constraints that we know exist in the township that came up through the survey, came up from feedback from you guys, and then also just, you know, visiting the township and understanding traffic and circulation issues. And so, you know, what is a common constraint for a lot of suburban communities is the vehicular infrastructure. You know, the stoplights, the bridge abutments and things like that. This all becomes physical barriers to really enhancing our connectivity, whether that be walking or even driving. And so how can you really look at those areas as opportunity areas, thinking creatively about your community? That's something that the comp plan can help explore in terms of the design and physical makeup of the neighborhood. But what the comp plan can also help do is to say, okay, we know that these traffic issues exist, or we know that circulation is strained because of X, Y, and Z. Who do we need to coordinate with to unlock and make these places more efficient and better connected? And so that could be coordinating with local stakeholder groups such as our trail friends here, or at a state level like PennDOT, but thinking through who are the stakeholders, who do we need to get in the room and start to think through this and be a little bit more efficient in our planning efforts. And again, just to circle back on it, thinking about how to move pedestrians throughout the community. Again, there's a thriving commercial corridor that's right behind us here, Route 30, and thinking about how do we get pedestrians to move through those spaces, if that's even a possibility, but how can we think creatively about that in long-term planning.
Before we got here, had gone up to the plaza where the Walmart is, right? And Greg had made the comment, well, this is probably the commercial corridor about the most walkable that the township has. Meaning I could conceivably walk from the Walmart over to one of the small strips, right? That's fundamentally,
Yeah.
would you guys agree with it?
So I live in the neighborhood right behind there.
Yeah.
The kids already have a trail system throughout the township. So they can go to Crumble and Tropical Smoothie Cafe
Yep.
from about 7 neighborhoods through Lincoln Hills on a pretty massive child trail system. So, we're already, the kids are making it for us, but unfortunately it goes through people's yards that don't like it.
Yeah.
So, everyone wants kids to go out.
Yeah.
People that own property don't want kids to be out, so,
And it's
kind of
it's not a criticism either. It's really
Yeah.
just looking at safety, right? If you're on Route 30, do you feel comfortable walking, even though those businesses are within a proximity that you could easily walk to? It's really that level of comfortability. Whereas when you get up by the Walmart, it feels a little bit quieter. Traffic is moving slower, or at least from when we visit, I'm sure there's people that drive
well, there's
faster.
sidewalks.
Yeah, but there's the
There's not
infrastructure.
50,000 cars, I'm
Right.
making numbers up like you had on 30.
Yeah, the infrastructure is there to move people, and so you feel more inclined to walk about like that. And then if you had a more robust trail network, thinking about how it really unlocks residents getting to and from these places.
So then my question is, if you were queen or king for the day and you closed your eyes, is that situation really where the township aspires to be in 20 years?
No.
That type of, that mobility is where you think you want to be? Was that a no over here?
Well, no, we want it to be open. We'd like to have 3 or 4 extra feet of pavement on every road with a yellow line, so you can get on your bike and go down
Okay.
Barnes Lake Road, Clay Pike, not just 30,
Yep,
all over the township.
yep. How about others?
I agree with him with the sidewalks and stuff. Without those, it's going to be pretty dangerous on any of those roads. I'm not sure I would recommend anybody ride a bicycle on
Right.
Barnes Lake Road, Route 30, Clay Pike.
Those
Yeah.
are main arteries through the township to get around, really.
Yes.
Going
Yeah.
back to the previous presentation, I guess the one suggestion I would throw in there once in a while, where you had fun, that couple words, throw safety in there. Because I agree with Greg, that's, when you have to conquer that 30, wherever the crossings are, those types of things, that's the big challenge. And even the kids are doing it because it's a safe route, right? And the parents have accepted, okay, that's a safe route. We can deal with that. They're going to Smoothie King or wherever they're going. It's a safe route. So from a comp plan standpoint, that is an aspiration there are all kinds of things that have to be overcome to make that ever become a reality. And so that should be something that we're working towards as we start getting into detailed recommendations. That's your yardstick to measure from, that are we achieving that vision, but at the same time dealing with things like safety, you know, or if we can't be on 30, are there other alternatives to be able to get them mobility? Because they're not doing trails across there. They're just doing it from the neighborhoods into that almost as a foci or a center itself.
AJ, one of the things that we pushed down there at that development was the interconnectivity between lots. So those multi-tenant buildings that you mentioned with Crumble and with Jersey Mike's, there's a rear access road that's going to go all the way up. So we felt keep more traffic off of Mills Drive, even though Mills wasn't as heavily traveled as, say, a Route 30. It was just that interconnectivity between lots that you don't have on Route 30. It seems like Route 30, there's one curb cut for one business, and you have to slam on the brakes to get in and take your life in your hands when you're trying to pull out.
And so, because we all know that 30 has, over the years, been studied to death, but in some cases, consolidating some of those points of ingress and egress in other sections of 30, where you don't have all that room, you're not going to have a parallel road or a secondary type of thing, but forcing those driveways to consolidate. So when T-Mobile goes out and the next Smoothie King comes in, then you're not going to consolidate the lots, but at least the driveways that go shared. Is that something that this plan should be kind of beginning to dip your feet into, those types of recommendations?
Sort of like the waterfront down in Homestead. They have a lot of consolidated driveways, and
Yeah.
you can access multiple buildings from one access point.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, your challenge is different than the waterfront, is you have this pattern that already exists.
They started from scratch.
They started from scratch, so it may take you 20, 25, 30 years to get, developments to begin to, but, there's zoning techniques, in terms of access management overlays and other stuff that we can introduce in the comp plan, have that kind of discussion, so then when it comes to zoning amendments, then you really kind of scrutinize whether that's gonna work. And the nice thing on that is, you may be able to do that on some portions of 30, but you don't adopt it on all sections. Because some places, back to crawl, walk, run, it may be manageable in some area, and you want to proof of concept. See if you can make some change, make some improvement before you roll it out over the entire, 5-mile stretch of Route 30.
So I know that this conversation came up in the last meeting, and so we wanted to address some of the, and again, it's so timely that our friends are here for Norwin, for the Norwin Trails, but again, there are many opportunities throughout the township to create more pedestrian-friendly trails and networks. We've identified 2 particular corridors here that rely on either active or inactive rail lines. But I know that this conversation came up in the last meeting where an individual was talking about how do we unlock some more creative open space areas for pedestrian circulation throughout the neighborhood. So again, just looking at the long-term visioning, again, as AJ mentioned, there could be many obstacles to overcome, and it's not something that happens overnight, but long-term planning of these places, sort of coordinating, these lots, the ownership patterns, things like that. How can you really start to link up and create a network of open spaces or a system of trails that can really help the community circulate throughout?
The one thing to plant a seed on, Greg, can you take your cursor, that section that's going kind of northwest to southeast, right through there. We're working on a kind of a trail effort up in Erie County, and one of the things that there's 2 communities that are involved in this that are seriously exploring is knowing that they may have to live with putting sharrows on the road or signs along the road in the short term. What they want to do in zoning is be able to have almost a required trail easement, just like you would require sidewalk in a development, that that type of situation where that area isn't as heavily developed and has undeveloped land, that you could actually get trail corridor as a part of the development, no different than you did at Walmart, in terms of requiring sidewalks or those secondary access points, those parallel circulations. So there's other things that can be done that, well, these guys were focusing on maybe converting a railroad to a trail. In the short term, you might be able to get an on-road, just a simple signage. The long term, implement something through zoning, and then you could get rid of the sharrows and build a trail which is separated from the road, right? It's just like in the front yard, it's just as you would require a sidewalk in somebody's front yard. So those are things that we'll take these ideas, this was you, in terms of taking those ideas and push them a little bit further as we get into the detail. Because we'll have a summary for every one of the major recommendations and how to implement, what's entailed in it, give a detailed description, then get into how to implement it. And in some cases like that section, I think you might have the opportunity to do that. Now what that means is you may not have a trail corridor for 20 years in that road section because it just takes that amount of time for the development to occur. But the nice thing is it's not heavily developed and you're kind of getting it in place now. So when it does happen, now you have a protected corridor that you can build sidewalks or trails. And then that would link in with what they're trying to do in terms of rail trail conversions and be able to push further south to Allegheny Passage, et cetera.
This one is pretty self-explanatory, but very important. Supporting local businesses. I think that in a place such as North Huntington Township, where you do have a thriving commercial corridor of many chain restaurants, the local businesses are really the ones that the person behind the counter, their family, things like that, and that just really starts to build that sense of community. These are the places that, just historically, if you look at urbanism and land planning and things like that, these are the places that really create a sense of place for a neighborhood. And again, we think that through the comp plan, we should really recognize how to identify those assets in ways that we can really start to keep them in the neighborhood and make sure that if there's strained connections that exist to getting folks to and from those businesses, how can we start to unlock opportunities to get people to visit these places so that we can ensure that small local businesses can thrive throughout the township?
Number 3, just out of curiosity, what were people hitting on when they said limited mix of commercial uses? Meaning the zoning ordinance doesn't call out aquarium supply stores versus, I'm making stuff up.
Yeah. I think often what you see, again, so 2 parts to your question. So as it relates to the survey, folks were finding that, there was similar restaurant or similar commercial type destinations or options for that matter. So, like going to a Walmart versus a Target or, but how do you find some of the smaller mom and pop places that can maybe fill in the gaps? But through, as a land use and zoning perspective, how a comp plan can start to address those is to say, maybe we, in certain areas, we limit the square footage that doesn't permit a Target, but it permits a smaller establishment, a smaller cafe or a smaller restaurant, things of that nature. And not necessarily to preclude that sort of development so that the site, if there's not a developer that's interested in developing something small, just walks away from the table. But again, to your question earlier about equity and flexibility and things of that, how can you build in the flexibility to ensure our first priority is getting in a local small business? But if we know that that's a challenge because of the market, things of that nature, maybe it does need to be someone who is a bit bigger, that has a bigger portfolio, like a chain restaurant for that matter.
Okay, so the only caution I would throw on this, Greg had described there was maximum square footage, using a maximum square footage to put a control on so you don't get the 100,000 square foot Walmart. You have full zoning authority to do that, okay? If you put a maximum square footage of, in a particular area, it can't be more than, say, 10,000 square feet. We can never guarantee it's gonna be a local business. It could be a national chain, a national franchiser that comes in, and it fits their shtick, that they can do a business in 10,000 square feet. Trader Joe's, as an example, is not, if any of you have shopped at Trader Joe's, I would call it a grocery store. Doesn't have 16 different versions of cornflakes, like when you go into Giant Eagle, you have every different version that there is. You're not gonna get that at Trader Joe's, and they can fit, but it still is a national chain. So the one thing I guess I'm gonna caution is that the idea of having local, we don't need 3 McDonald's, I think is probably what some people are saying, right? Having some fast food probably makes sense. Even if we restricted sizes to try to be more accommodating what we think is local, doesn't mean it will necessarily succeed. So just want to put that.
Yeah. No, thank you for that clarification. I think though too that by embedding that as a priority, it puts a lens on it so that when the planning commission or any, some of the experts are reviewing the application for that matter, they can be an advocate for, we know this is a community priority to have something that is more community oriented, something local, and trying to steer the conversation that way. And then again, our conversation we had earlier about some of the, just getting the word out about events, finding your signature event. It sounds like there are events that exist. It's just a matter of getting the word out. But again, I think really being able to build that center, not physically, but just more conceptually, building that center where folks can come together, celebrate a sense of community. It's something that they can rely on. This is that time of year where everyone comes together. But that really starts to help build, again, that strength that every small community looks at. And so those are really the key takeaways from some of our comprehensive planning research to date. In the appendices, there is more information that looks at some of the maps, such as land use and zoning, looks at the surveys, of course. We didn't want to go through that in exhaustive detail here because we want to be cognizant of your time. But we did want to just talk about some of the next steps here. AJ, feel free to jump in as you see fit, but what we wanted to start doing from here on through our monthly meetings is to really start to put material in front of you all that start to talk about or chapters that would go into the comprehensive plan that would start to address some of the key themes that we've seen throughout the surveys, some of the best planning practices that we know that could help with the comprehensive plan. And then start, like I said, put that in front of you all and start to receive some of your feedback. Are we missing things? Are we spending too much time on things? But to really start to have that dialogue so that we can create a high-quality, comprehensive document.
So I think what was previously planned was, I think your meetings are scheduled through June, July. So every month we would have a section. I think when you look back at the schedule, what was laid out was you would have meetings through June or July of '23. So in kind of the March timeframe, did you realize you signed the paper for that long of a commitment? So coming in March, we'll send out a week ahead of time kind of that draft chapter, so you guys have time to review that ahead of time. So when you get to the meeting, we can get right into kind of the meat and potatoes, a little bit of presentation, orientation, walk you through. But like the March would be kind of that first chapter, and over the course of the next 4 months or so, work through those chapters. so that you're slowly building on things. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't at some time circle back to a chapter because maybe something was brought up that we need to now make a tie back to a past, but those are usually fairly minor types of things. So the goal was June to have a full document so that you got an integrated document that's covering everything that meets the MPC requirements, all that kind of stuff, but that you could start doing that public review process, because that in itself is 45 days. So that doesn't mean you don't have public discussion along the way. You just can't adopt a plan until that public review is over. But that's kind of the timeline.
And two other notes here, and one of them I want to ask for your help on, but is the community piece here. So our online survey will still be available. As I mentioned earlier, there's, to date, we have a little over 950 comments, which is pretty impressive. So that's really helping with a lot of the background information that we have. But in addition to that, if there's upcoming events that you know folks are going to show up for that you think would be appropriate for us to kind of come out and talk with folks about similar questions that are on the survey, you know, just trying to get a temperature check and to really make sure that we're getting a broad reach of the audience, of the community. So that's where we want to rely on you to ask if you know of things coming up.
Yeah, I could send you guys a list of our upcoming events.
Thank you.
Like the Halloween, that was very effective in terms of reaching people.
Any questions for us or thoughts, recommendations?
Yeah.
And if you do have follow-up after you've had a chance to digest everything, look at the PowerPoint packet in more detail, feel free to send us an email. I'll make sure that you guys have my contact as well.
I think it's good, the information we got earlier with this, agenda, it's easier to follow that way. I thought, it's on. Yeah, that helps quite a bit, gives you time to look at it ahead of time and give some thought to it, and, when we come to a meeting, then we're more prepared to either ask questions or listen to you guys a little more informatively. So
Sure.
that's a good thing we've adjusted to.
Great, thank you. And especially that becomes ever more important once we start putting actual, chapter pages in front of you. I'll make sure that it gets out to you in advance so you have time to review it and, if there's questions that arise.
And I would imagine for budgeting your personal time, it's 16 hours a week or so probably to review stuff.
That's all?
Yeah.
You probably will have to do a couple hours, all said and done from meeting to meeting, within a month period. By the time you read stuff, walk away from it, come back, reflect on it, start making notes, you probably do that. So it is a big commitment. Well, I was joking with you. You did kind of sign up for this and agree. So this is the backside of the commitment. There's time investment. We seem like we're going in the right direction. We're going to throw detail at it.
Where is, on page 17, you have set up an online database with those 5 resources. Where's that located at?
So there should have been an email sent to you all, and if you...
Is that on a Google Drive?
Yeah, that's the Google
Okay.
Drive. And thank you for asking that. So that particular resource is just available to the steering committee. Those are, as we find precedents, as we work through additional precedents, we'll put them in that folder just so you're aware, just for transparency purposes, hey, this is where we got those data points from. So if in your free time, if this is something you're interested in reading on, that information will be available in there. But that's really some of the guiding documents that I'll be using and some of the team will be using to help write the comp plan.
Did everybody have access to that? Was good with it?
Yeah, everybody's good with that, because Harry actually asked a really good question, because sometimes people they don't like the Google Drive kind of stuff, where they may have a technical issue that they can't actually get to it. So if that seems to be the way to do it, we'll carry on that way. Yes, the database makes it sound like it's very sophisticated. We're just borrowing somebody else's database.
Okay.
You guys good?
Can you, I unfortunately missed the last several meetings. What are your names and who do you work for?
I'm Greg Miller with Environmental Planning and Design.
AJ Schwartz, Environmental Planning and Design, and then the gal that you regularly see is Carolyn Yeagle, Environmental Planning and Design.
Thank
All
you.
three of us work together.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 2 people watching us on Facebook.
Doubled our audience from last time.
Probably one of them was my mom.
One of them is me.
Okay, maybe not. Oh, yeah. Welcome.
Much easier than
Yeah.
making you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Yeah, I like that agenda that they present. It's easier to follow.
Oh, yeah.
Like, last meeting, we were like